Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. Mark Rippetoe says the average person can't run the Texas method. It requires 9 hours of sleep a night and a willingness to gain weight. I'm 27 and work a manual labor job. I sleep 7 to 8 hours most nights, sometimes less, and eat around 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. You think I can run program even with less than perfect recovery circumstances? All right, you know what, brother, that's really hard to say. And when we're talking about a program like the Texas method, yeah, it's a pretty aggressive program. I believe it's an aggressive intermediate program, if I recall the experience level. You know what, it's something like that. It's going to be hard to say. If you're struggling to recover on it, you might want to add a little more sleep. Now, as far as the manual labor aspect of it, the manual labor component, guys who do manual labor, if you've been doing it a long time, your body has probably adapted to the workloads. Your body is probably adapted to the workloads of the manual labor just fine. Now, that may not always leave you extra recovery ability, but usually you can get on a decently aggressive strength program and still make progress while doing manual labor. Again, assuming food and rest are sufficient. Now, it sounds like you're eating a lot of calories. You might have to gain a little weight on his program, though, so you might have to up your carbs just a little bit. If you're going to add calories, get them from carbs. As Cali Muscle would say, up your carbs, player. But, yeah, increase calories if you need to. You might need to add a little more sleep. Now, the other thing that I always recommend to guys who are doing very physical jobs, somewhat physically demanding jobs, who are trying to gain strength, remember something. When it comes to accessory work or adding volume, you need to step back and seriously assess if the extra volume is worth it to you. Meaning, if your day-to-day activity has you lifting and moving a lot of things, you're doing construction or anything like that, mechanical work, you're already getting a decent amount of low-intensity strength endurance at your regular job all day long. You don't need to add strength endurance at that point. It's not really a big deal. So you need to step back and assess how much volume you're actually doing. So you could look at it and say, okay, well, this has me doing 5 sets of this exercise. Maybe I could get away with 3 instead. So that's what you need to pay attention to for someone in your situation with a manual labor job on an aggressive program. Look at the volume of things, particularly the accessory work, and ask yourself, do you actually need the extra metabolic fatigue? Do you need the extra endurance? And step back and assess anything like that, and really try to minimize the extra work that you're doing, because you need to understand your normal job might actually contribute to your strength, endurance, and cumulative fatigue already, and so doing it in the weight room may not help you. But getting strong on those big lifts, getting strong on the important lifts, that stuff is going to be the most important. So you can't skimp there, but you can always sometimes skimp on the accessory type stuff or the volume stuff for someone with a manual labor job, because you're getting redundancy, you're getting overlap, and you're just eating into your recovery at a certain point. So that's a good way to look at it for someone in your situation, and how I would assess it. But yeah, you could give it a try, and if it's too much and it's too much, run a different program. All right, next question. On full body 3 days a week, how would you expect the progression to go? If I progress on a Monday lifting heavier, by Wednesday I'm still fucked. So I do 8 times 3s at 60%, basically a mini deload. Saturday is intermediate weight day. Heavy again on Monday. Age 32, this seems to be the best, be the way to manage the workloads, as recovery seems half from my early 20s. All right, brother. Yeah, there's something to that. Obviously, you're not a novice lifter. I was going to say, if you're a novice lifter, you don't need heavy, medium, light days. Hell no. You're not a novice lifter. You're 32 now. You've been lifting since your 20s. There's a couple of reasons your recovery is going to seem a little lower to you in your 30s. It's not just because of age. Not just because of age. Yeah, you're going to recover a little slower at 32 versus 22. There's no doubt about that. It's not going to be enormous, but it is going to be noticeable. That being said, the other factor to consider is, like I talked about before, recovery and experience level also has to do with relative strength and workloads. Someone who can squat 500 pounds can work a lot harder in every minute of their training than someone who can only squat 300 pounds. So if when you were 22 or 23, you were only squatting 300 pounds, and now you're able to squat 400 or 500 in your 30s, you're also generating a higher workload in every workout because you're moving more weight, more tonnage with the same number of reps and sets. That is harder to recover from no matter what your strength is. And people need to always remember that when it comes to these relative workloads. The stronger you are, the easier it is for you to generate workouts that are harder to recover from. And again, perfect example. Squatting 200 pounds for 10 reps is easier to recover from than squatting 400 pounds for 10 reps, even if it's the same person who's gotten stronger over time. Meaning when you're strong enough to squat 400 pounds for 10 reps, you're doing more trauma to your body, to your nervous system, to your bones, everything else than you were doing at 200 pounds with 10 reps, even though they feel relatively similar at that point due to your strength level. So as you've gained experience in the gym, experience training, experience lifting, you have impeded your recovery quite a bit. All right, your ability to recover, because you've gotten so much stronger. You can hammer your recovery ability harder than you could when you were younger because you're probably stronger now. In addition to the fact that our tendons and joints and everything recover a little slower as we get older. Now we can train to improve that, hence you obviously have. But yeah, the other thing that you're going to notice, you can't have heavy days like that all the time. And what you're doing for a more advanced lifter, an older, more advanced lifter who has quite a few years under the bar, is doing a heavy, medium, light system on full body is actually an effective way to do it. I think what you're doing is smart, and I think what you're doing shows experience and wisdom. Like you've learned this kind of messing around, reading on your own. If you've been training for like a decade, and you're a little older guy, you've learned this about your body. You've learned that you have to do things like this in order to recover and continue to make progress. And that's a good thing. And I like what you're doing. I think the heavy, medium, light system for advanced lifters doing full body is actually a reasonable way to go. I'm not saying you need to run it that way year round. There's different systems you can rotate through. But that's a proven method. And it's a proven method because it capitalizes on recovery ability with deload workouts, almost deload type workouts like you described throughout the week, so that you continue to maintain neural pathways, muscle protein synthesis uptime. Those lighter workouts still help you. And again, particularly when you're still recovering from those heaviest workouts. And truth be told, when you get up into your 30s and you're an advanced lifter, you might only be able to get away with one really heavy workout every week. You know, just like you might only be able to get away with deadlifting really heavy only once a week, even if you're doing it multiple times. It's just all about balancing recovery with progress. It's as simple as that. And I like what you're doing. So keep doing it. All right, next question. Hey Jason, is there such a thing as squatting too low? I squat as far down as I feel comfortable, which is way past parallel. If this is a problem, what methods would you recommend to train myself to squat an inch or two higher or just past parallel? Alright. Honestly, as far as squatting too low, the problems with squatting too low usually come with the form of squat you're doing and your foot width. The people who can squat too low easily are going to be people who are low bar squatting. The low bar squat makes it more difficult to squat lower. It makes you a lot tighter in the bottom. It also limits range of motion to some extent. That's one reason that the low bar squat is preferred by competitive powerlifters to lift maximum weight. They can lift a little more because you're not only limited sometimes on your depth, which makes it easier to not go much deeper than is needed to pass at meet, because it is harder to get deep. It's very difficult from a mobility perspective for the majority of lifters to get ass to grass or to get 3 or 4 inches below parallel with a low bar squat. Most people really only get their mobility up enough to go about an inch or so under parallel on the low bar. There are exceptions, but it's a limiting factor, along with the fact that the whole bar itself moves a shorter distance. But as far as getting deeper, people who high bar squat, who find the right foot position for themselves, they're the ones who tend to be able to squat really, really deep. And so I would say there's no such thing as too deep, really, on a high bar squat or an Olympic style squat, unless you're squatting too deep for your mobility that could put stress on your hips and everything. It can cause you problems if your foot spacing isn't right. But when you find a comfortable foot spacing, you should be able to go ass to grass and pause with a relatively heavy weight, and it should be pain-free. It shouldn't cause problems in your hips or anything else if you found the right foot width, the right stance, everything else there. But really the guys who have to be a lot more aware of this are going to be the low bar squatters, and a lot of low bar squatters will even struggle to get to parallel until they find the right foot stance. And again, the majority will never have the mobility to low bar squat 3 or 4 or 5 inches below parallel. That's relatively rare. Not saying there aren't guys who do it. I know guys who do it, but they're the exception. They're not the norm. And a lot of high bar squatter or low bar squatters are going to struggle to even reach depth. And at a certain point, yeah, squatting too deep with the low bar can actually become problematic for you, and it can cause problems to your joints and everything else. But again, it comes down to the style of squatting you're doing, the sort of foot width you're using, and people need to understand foot width. Ideal foot width for a squat is a very, very individual thing, and you're not going to be able to look at a person externally at their limb lengths and determine ideal widths for any style of squat as far as getting deeper, simply because hip structures internally vary a lot from person to person, and you're not going to be able to look at them externally and understand what's going on in there. They're going to have to do a lot of it by feel and find that sweet spot. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 3.